Hi, my name is Martin Griebing. I am a principal and co-founding member of Transgraphics Consulting, and I will be walking you through a step-by-step guide on how to create 3D typicals from Microstation or CAD files using virtually any 3D software title. Having said that, let's begin. Okay, first things first. We need to take your cross-section that's normally provided as a DGN and through your software either save that as a PDF or simply request the cross-section as a PDF from your engineers. Once you have the PDF file, we need to take it and either drag and drop it into a program such as Photoshop so you can save it as an image file. Now, if you don't have Photoshop, there are a host of free or very inexpensive basic image editing programs out there. If you have Windows, you can even use Paint to take your PDF and turn it into a JPEG. So simply just go to your programs. It's under Windows Accessories, Paint. And here we are. Now, to do this, simply open your PDF. There's your cross-section. Now, just do a screen capture, which is Shift, Print Screen. Go back to your Paint program, and then hit Control-V, or Paste. And there we go. Now we have your cross-section in an image editing program here, and all we need to do now is just crop it. So let's select the area that you want to keep, select Crop, and there we go. File, Save As, make it a JPEG. So let's keep this simple and just call it crosssection.jpg. Now, as you see here, we have a JPEG of the cross-section that you can then apply to an image plane in your 3D program to begin modeling your 3D typical. Okay, now that you have your 3D modeling program of choice open, first thing to do, simply make a plane. And we're going to be working exclusively in polygons. We're not going to be using any curves, no NURBs, no splines, straight up polygons to make everything so simple and so easy and so straightforward, and it makes everything much easier to manage and to modify later. So just create a plane in Z, and that's if Y is up. Now this is going to be your design plan. As you see here, this is a square. However, the design plan image file is not square. So we need to scale up this plane to match the dimensions of the texture file. So if you look here, under dimensions, it's 1622 by 793. So now we need to scale this to match that. So it's exactly to scale with the image. Otherwise, things are going to be lopsided. So 1622 by 793. We don't need to worry about the relative overall size of the plane at this point. We just have to make sure the proportions are right. Now, what we need to do is create a texture and then just go find your texture file. I'm basically applying this as a texture file that I can then apply to this image plane. That's all I'm doing. So whatever system that your software uses to do that, it's super basic. I'm sure you all know how to do this and probably do this every day. So I just applied that texture map to this image plane. So now you see we have this design plan on a 3D plane. The next step is we want to scale this. So what you need to do is look for the largest number that you can find on the design file here. And in this case, it looks like 52 feet. So this plan shows you with this dimension here that it's 52 feet from the center line to the right of way. So here's what we do. Let's go to a front view. Now you need to turn on X-ray or whatever your software calls it. It could be transparent, it could be ghosting, it could be X-ray. But you need to be able to somewhat see through this image plane here, because now we're going to use a measure tool. And all I'm going to do is measure distance from this point here, from the end of this dimension line to the center line here, because we identified that this is 52 feet, correct? Now, let's see exactly where we are in the real world here. If you look closely, it's 544 feet wide. Clearly that won't do. So let's scale this down so it's 1-to-1 and matches the design plan. So with my measure tools selected, I shift click the image plane and then group it. So I'm grouping all these three things together. So when I scale it, now it's going to scale everything together. And watch what happens now. So I'm just going to scale it by hand and shrink it down and see what's going on now. Now we're down to 200 feet and change. So keep going and going and going and going and going. We want to reach 52 feet. See, we're at 70 now. So we need to keep going a little further down until we get to about 52, 4, 3, 2. Now we have your design scaled to real world units 1 to 1, 1 foot to 1 foot to match the proportions of your design plan. Now we're set up and we're ready to model. Let's start modeling. Like I mentioned before, we insist on making everything the simplest, most direct route with the fewest number of steps. We're making revisions and adjusting things. So we're not going to use NURBS curves, we're not going to use splines. We're going to start with polys and we're going to end with polys. That is the native language of 3D. I like to start with the ground. And you can see that here, that this is the ground. It's actually labeled natural ground. A lot of cross sections don't have as many labels as this, but this is a really good one to use in a tutorial. So all I'm going to do, create polygon tool. And I'm just going to make a few clicks here. I'm going to trace this and just add maybe a few extra points, but we don't have to go crazy. We don't need a lot of points here. I want to make sure that I have enough points to play with so that I can go back later and make tweaks as needed. But as you see, I'm making this very angular. There's not a lot of curvature here. We're trying to make this as close as possible to the actual design plan. And notice in the design plan, there's no curves. They don't have the ground looking round at the peaks and the valleys. It's all very straight. It's all very angular. And that's what we want to continue to do with our 3D rendering, because we don't want to change that approach, because there's reasons that engineers like to have the ground represented this way. So now I'm at the edge here, so all I'm going to do is shift and go down. When I say shift, that just constrains it so I'm not moving an X, it's only going straight down, so I have a perfectly flat edge here on the end, which is what we want. And then again, I'm going to go over here and I'm going to finish up the ground, shift clicking again so that it doesn't move in Y. We're just going in X, and then shift clicking one more time, and I'll maybe add 1 or 2 more points just for good measure. And when you're done, here's what we have. Now we have the ground. Okay, and this is basically just a very simple ground shape. I mean, people's first lesson with 3D modeling programs, it's about as complicated as this. We're just using a polygon tool to draw a shape. We're tracing these plans, so it's practically brainless at this point, and that's the way we like it. We want it to be as simple as possible. We want to take the guesswork out of it. We want to rely on the plans and trace what your clients have given you or what your fellow engineers or staff have given you. Now let's do the sidewalks. Same process. Create your polygon and just trace it. Simple as that. Now we have a sidewalk. Now let's do this curb and gutter. Now the curb and gutters do have a little bit of curvature to them. However, let's still do polys, because you'll see that once you build these curb and gutters this way, it looks better when it's rendered. The edge is more pronounced. If this curb and gutter is too smooth and you have all these perfectly smooth gradations in there, it's kind of hard to see the features, and you'll see what I mean later. But here it is. This is all we're doing. Trace, trace, trace. And that could be tweaked a little. That was a little sloppy here. So we just go back and I'm just adjusting the points. I'm pushing and pulling the points I just made to try to make it maybe a little nicer. That's it. So we're done. Now let's do the road. Draw your shape, trace the design plan, and now you're done with your shape. And let's go ahead and do the stabilizers while we're here. And these are basically all just rectangles for the most part. So it should take you about 4 seconds to build these. Now let's do this stabilizer here. This is a little more detailed, but not much. It's just another rectangle, but with a few more angles in it. There we go. And again, I'm going to tweak this a little bit after I drew it, just to fine tune it a little so it matches a little better than before. Now here's another curb and gutter. This is type E. So you see it's a little sharper. So just keep that in mind when you're making this. It's not exactly the same as the other one. And something like that. There we go. Now we're done. Now, here is where you get a lot of extra value with 3D typicals. Notice this is basically symmetrical. Other than the swale and the ditch, the content is basically symmetrical. So you don't have to redraw all these curb and gutters and the road and the stabilizers on this side, because later on we're just going to end up duplicating and mirroring this. So it's kind of nice in this particular typical that we're going to be able to just model one side and then we can duplicate it and flip it over later. Now that this is done, we have our basic shapes here. If you go to the 3D window now, it's kind of hard to see because there it's literally on top of your plane, your design plane. So take this plane and just push it out of the way, move it way back. And then I like to turn the grid off because that just tends to get in the way. And I'm going to go ahead and delete those dimensions, those measuring tools from earlier, just get that out of the way. Now this is black just because the normals got reversed. So if that happens, just reverse your normals, not a big deal. Only takes a quick second. So I'm going to do that. Let's go ahead and turn on wireframe unshaded so you can see the work that you've done. So now that we have basically almost all the key shapes mapped out here, all we need to do is extrude them. So I'm selecting everything, and all we need to do at this point is extrude. And it's all going to extrude together, which is nice. But they're still going to extrude as separate objects. So now we have a nice 3D section here with sidewalk, curb and gutter, road, and stabilizers. Now I need to reverse my normals again, just for display purposes. It won't render black, that's just a display thing. So here we go. So as you can see, this thing's really starting to come alive now. Now it's starting to almost look like a 3D typical. One thing we're going to want to do right now, let's go ahead and do at this point, everything is coplanar. So in other words, we created all of these shapes and all these polys at ground zero. So when you render this, you may not be able to see the difference between the curb and gutter, the stabilizer, the road, and the sidewalk because all their edges are lined up perfectly with each other. See that on the side there? So what we need to do is just select all the objects that you want pulled forward so that they go past the edge of the ground just a little bit so you can see them clearly when we do the render later. Now see how they're up just a little bit here. So we need this edge, otherwise if it's sunken back in like perfectly level with the ground, you may not actually see that when it's rendered from the front view. And we're going to do the same thing with the stabilizers. Just pull those forward a little. That way everybody's visible. Okay, now that we've gotten our main shapes out of the way, we need to create the striping. So since we have already created shapes, why recreate the wheel? Let's go ahead and take this road that's already been extruded, duplicate the geometry, and then just push and pull the points and turn it into a stripe. So just come down here, and again, this is the simplest, easiest, most direct route for doing all this stuff. It doesn't have to be perfect because anything that's below the surface, you probably aren't going to see anyway, especially when it comes to striping. So let's go ahead and call this done for the inside stripe. Now that we've created one stripe, let's just duplicate this for the other stripes. So I duplicated it, and this is a buffered bike lane, as you see there, which basically just means there's two stripes. So you put two there. So now you have your buffered bike lane stripes, and you have your inside stripe for the roadway here. Now that this is done, since there's two lanes, we need to create the skip striping. Now the skip striping is almost always 1030 skip, which means the stripes are 10 feet long, spaced 30 feet apart. So to do this, we can't kind of just eyeball it like we did these others. This has to be more exact because the stripe has to be 10 feet long exactly. So all you need to do, create a cube, not a plane, a cube this time. Scale the cube, you guessed it, 10 feet in Z. So now we have a stripe that's exactly 10 feet long. So let's go ahead and just push and pull these points so it matches the profile of the road a little better. Notice there's a little tilt, and there almost always is. And here we go. So now that we have our stripe here, and it's on the road, we need to have 30 feet between each stripe. Now to do this, we're going to need to duplicate the stripe several times and then have 30 feet between each stripe. So to do that in this program, you go to a feature called Duplicate Special, and we already have it set up here to translate negative 40 feet in Z, and we have 5 copies here. If that's too many, we can adjust that later, but let's give this a try. And there we go. Now we have an extra stripe here, so just select that, delete it, and then we're done. If your particular 3D modeling program of choice does not have a function similar or identical to Duplicate Special, let's rewind a bit. All you need to do in that case is just duplicate this by hand. Just requires doing a little bit of quick math. So let's duplicate this stripe, and then we just translate it back in Z by 40. So we're currently at minus 16.683. So if you subtract 40 from this, minus 56. And then do it again. Duplicate. Subtract 40 from this total, so now we're at 96. Duplicate again. Subtract 40 from this total, so then we're at minus 136. Duplicate one more time. Subtract 40 again, and then we're at minus 176. And there you go. Most of our work is done as far as modeling goes. Remember, we're going to duplicate this and mirror it to flip it to the other side later. Now we move on to texturing. Now that most of the key elements have been modeled as far as the road goes, it's time to put some textures on these things. All you need to do is open your texture menu, and to save time, I have some pre-made, pre-set up texture files here. If you don't have these readily available, if you don't even have these in your library yet, we'd love to offer those to you. These textures are fully vetted, they're tileable, they're high res, they're easy to use, and we use them every day. First things first, let's start with the ground. I'm going to select just the faces of the top here. I want to add the grass, and I'm simply going to apply the grass texture, and then I'm going to use a planar map. We don't have to do anything with UVs by hand. That takes too much time, and honestly, it's not worth the effort. Just slap these textures flat, straight down on these models. Make it simple and easy and quick. So project, and then as you can see here, now we have a nice little ground texture. And if you want to repeat more, if you want it to look like there's a little more density, you can do this, but be careful not to repeat too often, otherwise it's going to look like it's tiled. It's going to look like a checkerboard, and try to make these things as seamless as possible because it adds a lot more realism and believability and appeal to the renderings. So now the grass is done, so I'm going to select the front face here, just the front edge of the ground, and this is going to be dirt. So all we need to do is open our texture window again. I have a dirt texture here. So I apply that here. And again, like the grass, I'm going to use a planar map, but this time it's in Z. If Y is up, then this is Z that I'm projecting here. There we go. Now we have a really nice dirt texture that gets sandier and rockier and grayer as it gets deeper. So you see how this is unfolding? And unless you specifically want to make a rendering from a 3/4 view or from the side, you'll almost never need to texture map this because these are almost always seen from the front view. So I wouldn't even bother with this unless you have a specific need for it. Let's go to the sidewalk next. So select your sidewalk geometry there, open your textures menu, and we have a pre-made sidewalk texture here. And then we're going to, again, planar map it in Y. So it's just projecting it straight down. We just grab the manipulator handle and just scale it. And you can see there's actually joints built into this texture. So it's nice, so you don't have to actually build those. Scale it so that it looks relatively accurate. Now let's do the curb and gutter. Same process. Go to your textures menu, add your cement texture, do a planar map, tile it, done. Now for the road, we'll add an asphalt texture, And we want to go straight down, planar map from Y again. So then you see this nice asphalt texture there that's already set up, and it's tileable, so you can repeat and scale this however you like. But again, we don't want to make it too repetitive, otherwise it's really easy to spot. So these stripes are the white ones, so we'll go ahead and apply our white striping texture. And also, the skip striping is white. Now, just to save time, so you don't have to go here and shift-click each stripe, just come to your front view, because you can select them all from here. Now, let's add the inside stripe, which is like a yellow-orange. There we go. And here it is. Now it's really starting to come together. It's starting to look like a roadway. Now let's go ahead and color the stabilizers. So just go back to your texture menu, and we have here Stab 1. So we'll go ahead and color that one Stab 1, and we'll make this one Stab 2. So there we go. What we want to do now to mirror this, because we don't want to rebuild it and redo the whole thing again just for the other side because it's symmetrical, come to your front view, select everything minus the ground, duplicate, group, and then scale in -1 or mirror or whatever system or whatever command your particular 3D software wants to call it. So now we have the other roadway, and the sidewalk even landed in the proper spot. We officially now have a 3D typical made from your Microstation or other CAD file. Now that all the main geometry has been built and textured, and we're getting really close to being done with this 3D typical, we need to populate it with some traffic. Now if you go way below off the bottom of the screen here, we have some models already here, already set up, already modeled, textured, and ready to go, and even aligned. All that we have to do is just drop these on the pavement, make sure they're lined up okay. Now let's take a look and see what they look like. Okay, here we go. Now that the traffic's done, we need to put some bicyclists. So guess what? Below the dirt here, we have some pre-set up models, including the bike lane markings. Now, if you don't have an assortment of pedestrians and bicyclists and bike markings and cars and trucks and semis ready to go and set up and ready to drop in to populate your 3D typicals, my email is below. Reach out to me. We'd be happy to provide you with all these models and all the content that we have. Just let me know what you're looking for, and we can come up with an estimate for you and ship it over to you the same day. So now let's take these models up to the surface. Let's do this bicyclist first. Let's put this person over here, and you just want to center it the best you can between the stripe and the curb and gutter. Here we go. Now since we're here, let's go ahead and put this pedestrian on the sidewalk, and let's do the same to the other side. And the reason that we're doing this separately is because they're facing different directions, so you can't just duplicate and mirror like we did before, because one of the bicyclists would be going the wrong direction and the bike markings in one lane will be facing the wrong direction. So you have to treat these separately. It's not like the roadway and the striping that you can duplicate and mirror. And also, you want a variety of textures too. So you don't want all the pedestrians to be dressed the same, all the bicyclists to have the same colors. You want a little variety so it feels more natural. So here we are. As you can see, some tweaking always needs to be done. So they were off the reservation there a little bit. So I'm just sliding them back on, and here you go. The next step, if it is requested, is to add dimensions. In the case that you need to provide the 3D typical with dimensions, I highly recommend doing this in your 3D file versus doing it in Photoshop or another image editing program. Because this is in 3D, there is a perspective that's going to be seen. You do it in Photoshop, you have to go through a lot of extra steps to try to make that text look like it's somewhat 3D and matches the focal length of the rendering. And then just The need to use a second program to finish your 3D typical is something we always try to avoid. We want this to come right out of our 3D program done. It's so much easier to adjust and create text and the dimension lines this way. So, as you might imagine, we have a very accommodating set of pre-made dimensions and numbers that are 3D models. So now we can just drag and drop our dimensions, our right-of-way lines, our center lines, our base lines, etc. from beneath the dirt up into the model here. So let's start with the construction line. So you have the CL line there. So we just go down, grab our CL line that's already made, and come up to the top here. Easy as that. So let's play a little memory game here. Let's see how many dimensions we can remember. We need a 22-foot median, 11-foot travel lane, 7-foot buffered bike lane, 5-foot sidewalk. 22, 11, 7, 5. 22, 11, 7, 5. And be sure to remember your dimension line. So duplicate that and just bring it up top. Now I'm going to leave these dimension lines over here for a second. Let's line up our text. So 22-foot median, let's go ahead and put that right there. We'll get rid of that center line that's going through the 22 in just a minute. 11, 7 for the bike lane, 5 for the sidewalk. Okay, now let's go back here, clean this up a little. We don't need that person, so done there. Now we have our dimension lines. So let's go ahead and line these things up. Find a good spot where it feels natural, and just slide these things around. Push and pull points of these polys. Duplicate, and we don't want to recreate the wheel every time, so let's duplicate this. And you can see it's not quite lined up because I was kind of zoomed out a little bit. That's why we have the option to always tweak these things very quickly and very easily because they're just in polys. Here we go, duplicate 11. So I'm just selecting these two objects, sliding them over, pushing and pulling the points to meet. Now, let's do it again for the sidewalk. This time it's only 5 feet. Now see what's great about doing it this way, you scaled your file to match the design file, so you don't have to measure anything. I don't even have to look at this and wonder if this is actually 5 feet because it matches this. We don't have to do any more measuring. We're just pushing and pulling points to match the lines. We're just tracing again, and that's a wonderful thing to do because you don't have to think. So here we go. Now what we can do is just duplicate all this stuff and then slide it over. There's one technique you can use. You can duplicate this like we did the roadway and group it and then scale it in -1 or mirror it. The trick with this, it also mirrors the numbers. So now they're backwards. However, since they're separate objects, just select the numbers and then scale them back. So here we go. Now we're done. Done with the dimensions. Oh, we need one more for the median. So we'll just duplicate this arrow, slide it over. Now we're done. The only thing left to do is to add the right-of-way. Now, of course, you may be requested to add more or less dimensions, but whatever's needed. It's very simple. As you can see, it's just drag and drop at this point. However, if you do not have a pre-made set of dimension lines, center lines, base lines, numbers, labels such as right-of-way, proposed, existing, minimum, maximum, etc. We have an entire array of text, labels, and dimensions that we've collected over the course of 15 years. If you want to purchase that from us, my email is right there. Just give me a shout, let me know what you're looking for, and we'll take care of you. Now back to the right-of-way. We need to go fetch our right-of-way lines. So here's our right-of-way. And then let's go ahead and duplicate right-of-way varies, just because I don't remember if it said varies, but let's go ahead and bring it up top. If it didn't say varies, we just delete the varies. Easy enough, right? And right-of-way varies. Okay, there we go. So it did vary. So the first things first, let's go ahead and drop the right-of-way line right there to make it match the one from the design plan. Let's save some space. Let's delete the bottom one, make an arrow here. down here to the center line. Now, we need to extend the center line, correct? Because we want it to go all the way down because that's where the right-of-way meets. So let's go ahead and do this. We can delete this, slide this up, and as you can see, I'm just mixing and matching here. This isn't complicated stuff, and it's also very on the fly. I mean, we've done a lot of these, so it's second nature to us, but as you can see, I'm not doing anything complicated. There's no special modeling skills required. We don't have to do double sweeps and spline this and sub-D that. This is all pushing and pulling polygons. It's the simplest thing you can possibly do to create these really cool 3D typicals. So right-of-way varies 52 minimum. So we need to go back down, fetch 52, and minimum. Duplicate that, bring it up top. Again, it only takes a second. Line it up with the label there. Let's slide this over so there's room. Add the minimum. If you want to save more space, you can just abbreviate it. So we just delete the rest of the word. Easy as that. Use the last bit of the I here and just scale it so it looks like a period. And no magic here. Like, we're just on the fly, modeling, tweaking, adjusting things as we go. And guess what? It's the same on the other side, I would bet. And it is. So just duplicate. Move over. And then duplicate your right-of-way line. Which should be about right here. Let's pull this arrow so it's just a little tighter, but not much. And there we go. Now we are officially done modeling, texturing, populating, and putting dimensions on this 3D typical. The only thing left to do now is to set up some standard lighting, however you like to do it. If you want to use V-Ray, Mental Ray, Arnold, or just your native lighting system from your 3D software package of choice. Just make it consistent, make it the same every time so you don't have to adjust it. Obviously, if you want to do like a nighttime rendering, the lighting's going to change. If you want to show it more overcast, then it's going to change. But for the most part, I'd say 99.99% of the thousands of 3D typicals that we produce, it's always a bright, sunny day with strong shadows and a strong light source. We want it to be clear, easy to see, and very bold. So for this, we just set up a very basic physical lighting. It only takes a second. We adjust our sunlight here. This is our sun. This is a directional light. We don't want it straight down, it'll blow out the image. So I like to put it at an angle, maybe about 45 degrees that way, something like that. Let's go ahead and hide the plans. Get that out of the way so we can see what this looks like. Let's go ahead and render. There we go. But as you do these, you're going to come across potential issues. You're going to come across tweaks. For example, this dirt is way too bright, wouldn't you say? So we need to turn down the diffuse in the texture window. And then the shadow over here on this bank is way too strong. I think it's too dark. So what I'll probably do, instead of really tweaking the lighting and messing with it much, just rotate the direction of the sunlight so it's going on top of that shape there and not casting a shadow on it. Let's change the sunlight. Let's go the other direction so it's actually shining on that bank. And then render. There we go. Now we have our 3D typical. And I strongly recommend saving these as pings or PNG. That way there's an alpha channel so that if your marketing people want to put this on top of a color or a logo or a pattern or what have you, they can just drag and drop it right in. However, it's easy enough to add a sky background if you want to do that in Photoshop. That's totally your call. But I'd say almost all the 3D typicals that come out of our camp are PNGs. I know we went over a lot of stuff, but I think as you review this or as you try to put these together, you'll realize that they're very simple from a technical standpoint. It's a lot of busy work to get started on these, but as you go and the more that you do, the easier it becomes and the more mindless it becomes. It's almost like you're on autopilot and you're just tracing shapes. On a good day, you should be able to create one of these from scratch if you have the libraries that we have in 30 minutes. If you need any help or suggestions or tips, feel free to email me. Or maybe if you're overloaded, maybe you have an in-house team that produces these, but you just don't have enough hands on deck. If you want us to help you, or if you just want us to do your 3D typicals for you, simply mention this webinar and we will produce unlimited custom 3D typicals for you, including revisions, for $275 each. And that's unlimited size, unlimited number, and we can get you first draft within 1 to 2 days of receiving the plans and official notice to proceed. So thank you so much for watching this. If you want any of the content that you see here, if you want any more of our systems or to find out any more tricks of the trade, email me. We'd love to help you out. I've enjoyed putting this together. Hopefully you found some information in here that's useful, that maybe helps you expedite your processes, or maybe just you've never done these before and this gives you a good introduction. So thank you for your time. Feel free to contact me at your convenience, and I hope to hear from you soon. Take care.